The daughter abandoned her mother in a tent in the woods, but what she discovered in the old house changed everything. Dorothy Mitchell never imagined her own daughter would be capable of abandoning her alone in the middle of dense woods, with only an old tent and 2 stray dogs for company. At 68 years old, the woman found herself completely isolated from the world, without a cell phone, without documents, and with few supplies, after Rebecca simply disappeared in the middle of the night. "Mother, you need a break from the city. This place will do you good," Rebecca had said the day before, helping to set up the tent among the dense trees of the rural property that had belonged to the family for generations. "I'll come back early tomorrow to pick you up." But tomorrow had come and turned into 2 days. 2 long days where Dorothy called for her daughter until her voice grew hoarse, while the 2 dogs, Toffee and Honey, seemed to understand her anguish and wouldn't stray more than a yard from her. The initial desperation gave way to a mix of hurt and determination. Rebecca was a successful lawyer in New York, always talking about how her mother was losing her mind for insisting on old stories about hidden treasures on the property. Dorothy sighed, remembering their last arguments. "Honey, I'm not making anything up. My grandfather always spoke about the documents he hid here before leaving for the war." "Mother, for God's sake, those are fantasies. You need to accept that you're getting confused," Rebecca would always reply impatiently, fiddling with her phone as she spoke. Now, alone in the woods, Dorothy felt something strange. The dogs seemed to know that place better than she did. Toffee, a medium-sized animal with golden fur and pointy ears, always walked in front as if he knew exactly where to go. Honey, shorter and chubbier, always stayed by her side, like a faithful guard. On the second day, when hunger began to tighten its grip, Toffee led her to a spring of crystal-clear water bubbling up between the rocks. There, Dorothy drank the purest water she had ever tasted in her life and noticed something curious. There were footprints of wild animals around the spring, as if that were a natural meeting point of the forest. "You've lived here before, haven't you?" she whispered to the dogs, who wagged their tails as if they understood perfectly. The night brought sounds that were frightening at first, but after a few hours, Dorothy realized they weren't threatening. It was the living forest, breathing around her. Among the tree branches, deer appeared from time to time, watching her curiously, before disappearing again into the shadows. On the morning of the 3rd day, Toffee began digging insistently in a specific spot, about 50 yards from the tent. Honey joined him, and together they removed leaves and loose soil until they exposed something that made Dorothy's heart race. Worked stones, covered by decades of vegetation. "What did you find?" she murmured, kneeling to examine it better. They weren't ordinary stones. They had a regular shape, as if they had been cut and fitted by human hands long ago. Dorothy began to clear the vegetation with her own hands, and with each leaf removed, more stones appeared, forming what looked like a low wall. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The discovery gave Dorothy an energy she hadn't felt in months. She forgot about hunger, thirst, abandonment. Her trembling hands worked with the determination of an archaeologist, removing layer after layer of leaves, moss, and small branches that had accumulated there over decades. Around noon, when the sun filtered through the tree branches and illuminated her work, Dorothy had exposed an area of approximately 2 square meters. What she saw made her tears flow freely down her wrinkled face. There, engraved on the smoothest stone, was the name William Mitchell, followed by the year 1924. Her grandfather. The man she had heard stories about since childhood, but whom Rebecca always said were inventions of a mind that was losing its lucidity. "He really was here," she whispered, running her fingers over the letters worn by time. "I wasn't making anything up." Honey approached and licked her hand, as if wanting to console her. Toffee kept digging at another spot a few meters ahead, and his low barks indicated he had found something else. Dorothy crawled to where the dog was digging and helped remove the dirt. Soon her fingers touched something hard and smooth. Carefully she unearthed a thick glass jar, the kind used for preserves in the old days. Inside it, even fogged by moisture, yellowed papers were visible. Her hands trembled so much it took several minutes to manage to open the jar. When she finally succeeded, the smell of old paper and dampness filled her nostrils. They were letters, written with careful handwriting in ink that was still legible. The first letter began, "To my dear descendants, who will one day find this treasure." Dorothy had to stop reading. The tears blurred her vision, and her heart beat so hard she feared she might faint. Here was proof that she had never lost her sanity. The stories she told Rebecca, which her daughter called the delusions of a senile mind, were real memories passed down from generation to generation. She took a deep breath and continued reading. The letter spoke of a family dispute involving the lands, of important documents hidden to protect future generations, and of a secret that William Mitchell would take to his grave, but would leave clues for his grandchildren and great-grandchildren to discover when the time was right. "The right time," repeated Dorothy, looking around. Perhaps Rebecca's abandonment hadn't been a coincidence. Perhaps it was exactly what needed to happen for her to find the courage to seek the truth alone, without her daughter's constant interruptions and disbelief. In the afternoon, a light rain began to fall, forcing Dorothy to take shelter in the tent with the dogs. She took the opportunity to read the other letters more calmly. One of them mentioned a second structure, hidden behind the first, where the family's most important documents would be kept. "If you are reading this," said one of the letters, "it is because you have already found the first clue. But be careful. There are people who still today want to take what is rightfully ours. Trust only true family, and be wary of those who try to convince you that you are crazy for believing these stories." The words hit Dorothy like a punch in the stomach. How many times had Rebecca said exactly that? That she was going crazy, that she needed to stop with those fantasies, that it was better to sell the property and go live in a retirement home in the city. The rain stopped at dusk, and Dorothy left the tent with renewed determination. The dogs followed her to the stone structure, where she began to look for signs of a second construction. Following the instructions in the letter, she measured 12 steps from her grandfather's inscription toward the water spring. There, almost completely hidden by denser vegetation, was another stone wall. Smaller, but with clear signs of having been built to hide something important. A small opening between the stones, just the size for an adult to pass through crouched, was blocked by branches and leaves. Dorothy worked until nightfall, removing the vegetation with the help of the dogs. When she finally managed to open enough space, she lit a stick on fire using the last matches she had in her backpack. What she saw inside would change her life forever. The small chamber excavated in the rock contained a wooden box, surprisingly well preserved. Inside it, dozens of documents carefully rolled and protected by waxed cloth. Land purchase and sale contracts, birth and marriage certificates, and extensive correspondence between William Mitchell and other families in the region. But the document that most caught her attention was an official deed dated 1923, which recorded William Mitchell as the legitimate owner of an area much larger than Dorothy imagined. According to the document, the property extended for nearly 1,000 hectares, including areas that now belong to other owners. An attached letter explained that William had hidden these documents because he discovered some neighbors were planning to forge papers to appropriate his land after he left to fight in World War II. He never returned from the war, but left this evidence so his descendants could claim their rights when necessary. The last letter, in a shakier handwriting, as if written in haste, said, "If you are finding this, it is because someone is trying to take from you what is rightfully yours. Do not give up. The truth always wins, even if it takes decades to come to light." Dorothy stayed up all night, rereading the documents by the light of the campfire she kept burning near the tent. Honey and Toffee took turns standing guard, as if they knew that discovery was too important to be left unprotected. On the morning of the fourth day, the sound of an approaching car broke the forest's silence. Dorothy recognized the engine of Rebecca's black sedan before she even saw it appear among the trees. Quickly, she put all the documents back in the box and hid it inside the tent. Rebecca got out of the car with the expression of someone expecting to find a repentant mother willing to accept anything to get out of there. She wore an impeccable lawyer's suit, which contrasted grotesquely with the wild forest environment. Her straight black hair was pulled into a perfect bun, and her high-heeled shoes sank into the damp earth with each step. "Mother, for God's sake, what is this situation?" she said, looking around with evident disgust. "You are all dirty with these torn clothes." Dorothy looked at herself. Indeed, her greying hair was dishevelled, her clothes had dirt stains and small tears from branches, and her hands were dirty from digging. But for the first time in years, she felt completely lucid and in control of the situation. "I'm fine, Rebecca. Better than I've been in a long time." "How are you fine? You spent 4 days alone in the woods, Mother. This is madness." "And why did it take you 4 days to come back if you said it would only be 1 night?" Rebecca hesitated for a second, then assumed a defensive posture. "I had problems at the office, urgent matters that couldn't wait. But that's not the point now. Let's get out of here. I've already arranged a spot at a very good nursing home with specialized nursing care." "I am not going to any nursing home." "Mother, be reasonable. You can't live alone anymore. These last few years, with these fantasies about treasures and hidden documents, you need specialized care." Dorothy stood up slowly, her knees sore after so many hours of digging. Toffee and Honey positioned themselves at her side, like faithful guards. "What if I told you they are not fantasies?" "Mother, we've talked about this 1,000 times." "Rebecca, I found the documents." The daughter stopped talking and looked at her with a mixture of pity and irritation. "What documents, Mother?" "The ones my grandfather hid here before leaving for the war. Those that prove our family owns much more land than you imagine." Rebecca sighed loudly and ran a hand over her face. "Mother, you dug around and found some old papers that are worthless. That doesn't prove that—" "Then come see." Dorothy walked over to the stone structure, followed by her reluctant daughter. She showed the grandfather's inscription, the uncovered walls, the second chamber. Rebecca observed everything with growing skepticism. "Mother, anyone could have carved that name there. And these stones could be from anything. An old carriage house, a pigsty. And this here?" Dorothy showed one of the documents she had kept in her pocket. "Do you recognize the signature?" Rebecca took the paper reluctantly, but as she read, her expression changed. As a lawyer specializing in real estate matters, she knew how to recognize the authenticity of historical documents. The paper had the right texture, the ink had the correct appearance for the period, and the official stamps were impossible to forge. Where did you find this?" "In the box that was hidden in there," Dorothy pointed to the second chamber, "along with dozens of other documents that prove our family is the legitimate owner of nearly 1,000 acres here in the region." Rebecca was silent for a long minute, rereading the document several times. Her legal knowledge prevented her from denying the authenticity of what she held. "Mother, even if this is true, it was 100 years ago. It's no longer legally valid. The lands have already been sold. They've had other owners for decades. But that doesn't mean we can't fight for our rights." "You're a lawyer, you should know that better than I do." Rebecca put the document in her suit pocket and assumed an expression Dorothy knew well. It was her daughter's professional face, cold and calculating. "Mother, let's suppose these documents are real. Do you know how much a lawsuit of that magnitude would cost? The specialized lawyers, the experts, the court fees? It would be more money than the two of us together could raise in our entire lives. But you have the firm. You have clients." "Mother, my firm is going through financial difficulties. I don't have the resources to bankroll a legal adventure like this." Dorothy studied her daughter's face. There was something Rebecca wasn't telling, some important detail being omitted. "What kind of financial difficulties?" "That's none of your business. The important thing is, I need to sell this property as soon as possible to settle some urgent debts." "Sell? But how can you sell when we now know the property is much larger than we thought?" "Because no one will believe this crazy story of hidden documents, Mother. And even if they did, it would prove you're not mentally fit to manage such a large estate. A judge would grant me guardianship anyway." The words hit Dorothy like slaps to the face. She was finally beginning to understand what was happening. Rebecca hadn't abandoned her mother in the woods by chance. There was a plan behind it all. "You've already sold part of the land, haven't you?" Rebecca looked away. "I only sold a small part, Mother, just enough to cover some urgent debts at the firm. Without consulting me. This property is mine. Legally, I have power of attorney to manage your assets. I obtained it when the doctor certified you were showing signs of mental confusion. Dorothy felt the world spin around her. Everything fit now. The medical appointments Rebecca had insisted she attend, always accompanied by her daughter, who spoke more with the doctors than she did. The trick questions about dates and names, always in front of the professionals. The insistence that she was getting confused whenever she mentioned the family stories. You planned all this? I planned the best for you, Mother. A decent retirement home, proper medical care, and the entire property for yourself. Whatever is left of the property after the debts are paid, yes, but that's better than leaving you here alone, talking to ghosts and digging holes in the brush. Toffee growled softly at Rebecca, as if sensing the tension in the air. Honey moved closer to Dorothy, pressing her warm body against the woman's leg. These dogs. Dorothy looked at the animals with new understanding. They aren't stray mutts, are they? What are you talking about now? They know this place. They knew where to find water, where to dig. Someone brought them here on purpose. Rebecca grew uncomfortable. Mother, they're just two strays who must have gotten lost from their owners. Who was it, Rebecca? Who is behind this story of abandoning me here? No one is behind anything. I just wanted you to have a few days of rest in the place you always said you loved, that's all. But Dorothy no longer believed a single word from her daughter. There was someone else involved in this story, someone who knew the secrets of the property and had an interest in getting rid of her. The client who's pressuring you to sell the land. Who is he? Rebecca paled. How do you know about that? Because I'm not crazy, dear. I never was. And now I'm starting to understand that you've been manipulated by someone who knows very well what they're doing. The sound of an engine interrupted the conversation. A second car was approaching down the dirt road. Toffee and Honey became alert, ears pricked and muscles tense. From the car stepped a man of about 50, dressed in expensive but appropriate country clothes. He greeted Rebecca with familiarity and looked at Dorothy with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Mitchell, I imagine you are Dr. Rebecca's mother. I'm Richard Crawford, a client and friend of your daughter's. She's told me so much about you. Dorothy did not return the greeting. There was something about the man's demeanor that made her suspicious. He looked around the property with the kind of interest that goes beyond casual curiosity. Dr. Rebecca told me you discovered some old documents around here. Must be interesting for the local history. How do you know about the documents? Dorothy asked directly. Richard laughed, but it wasn't a genuine laugh. Ah, small towns. News travels fast, doesn't it? We didn't tell anyone about the documents, Dorothy continued, ignoring the warning look Rebecca shot her. And you got here very quickly after my daughter learned of the discovery. Mother, don't be rude to Dr. Richard. Dr. Richard, Dorothy repeated. A doctor of what? In history, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm a researcher specializing in genealogy and historical documents of the region. The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Dorothy noticed that Toffee and Honey didn't like the man. The dogs remained on alert, their gazes fixed on him. And what is your specific interest in our property, Dr. Richard? Well, as I explained to your daughter, my family also has historical roots in this region. My ancestors were contemporaries of your great-grandfather, William Mitchell. In fact, there are records that our families corresponded back in the day. Dorothy felt a shiver run down her spine. The name William Mitchell had not been mentioned in front of this man. The only way he could know would be if... Rebecca, she said slowly, did you tell him about the contents of the documents? I only mentioned... Rebecca mentioned that you found some letters from her great-grandfather, Richard interjected smoothly. And I became very interested because there may be cross-reference correspondence in my family's archives. How convenient, Dorothy murmured, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Richard kept smiling, but his eyes hardened. Mrs. Mitchell, I know discoveries like this can make people emotional, but it's important to keep your feet on the ground. Very old documents rarely have legal validity nowadays. Have you seen the documents to know if they're valid or not? No, of course not, but from the description Rebecca gave me. So you admit my daughter described the contents of the documents to you in detail. Rebecca tried to intervene, but Richard cut her off with a gesture. Mrs. Mitchell, I'll be direct with you. Your daughter came to me because she is in serious financial trouble. Her practice has accumulated considerable debt, and she needs to sell this property urgently. And you are interested in buying. Exactly. For a fair price, which can solve Rebecca's problems and still leave a reserve to fund your care in a good nursing home. Dorothy looked at her daughter, who couldn't meet her gaze. And how much are you offering for the property? $200,000. It's a generous amount for such an isolated property with the buildings needing repairs. $200,000, Dorothy repeated slowly, for 1,000 acres of land with water springs, native timber, and tourism potential. Richard seemed surprised that she knew the true extent of the property. Well, actually, what's officially registered is only 50 acres, because the rest was usurped over the years by people like you. Richard's smile finally vanished. Mrs. Mitchell, I think you're letting your imagination run away with you. Documents from 100 years ago don't change the current reality of deeds registered at the county clerk's office, unless they prove fraud in the origin of those deeds. It was Richard's turn to pale. He glanced quickly at Rebecca, as if expecting her to control the situation. Mother, you're being irrational. I'm being rational for the first time in years, Dorothy exploded. You made me believe I was losing my mind when in fact you were the ones plotting to take my land. Mrs. Mitchell, Richard tried to regain a conciliatory tone, I understand that discoveries like this stir up emotions. But let's be practical. Even if these documents are authentic, a lawsuit to challenge century-old deeds would take years and cost a fortune. Your daughter can't afford that. But you can, can't you? Dorothy stared at him. You have the resources for a long legal battle because you know in the end you'll profit much more than you invest. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about you knowing the history of this property very well. I'm talking about you knowing exactly where to look for the documents. I'm talking about you placing these dogs here to guide me to the discoveries. Richard and Rebecca exchanged a look that confirmed Dorothy's suspicions. It was you who brought Toffee and Honey here, wasn't it? Mother, don't be ridiculous. Answer me, Richard. You brought the dogs. Richard took a deep breath, as if deciding how much of the truth he could reveal. I know a bit about animal behavior. I knew trained dogs could facilitate certain discoveries. Dogs trained for what? To find buried structures? To locate soil disturbances that indicate old constructions, yes. The confession landed like a bombshell. Rebecca looked at Richard in shock, as if hearing it for the first time. You told me the dogs were strays that showed up here by chance. Rebecca, you wouldn't understand the complexities of the situation if I explained all the details. What complexities? Dorothy demanded to know. What other lies have you told? Richard completely lost his conciliatory composure. All right, I'll tell the truth. My family does have historical connections to this region. My great-grandfather Henry Crawford was neighbors with William Mitchell, and yes, there are documents showing there was a dispute over the property boundaries at the time. And William Mitchell disappeared in the war before the dispute was resolved. My family assumed the land in question passed to us by abandonment. But you knew he had hidden proof that he was the legitimate owner. We suspected. For decades, my family heard stories about hidden documents, but we could never locate them, until I started talking about my grandfather's stories. Exactly. When Rebecca approached me to sell the property and mentioned that you were always talking about hidden treasures and your great-grandfather's documents, I knew I finally had a chance to locate that proof. And you decided it was better to have me find the documents and then take them for yourself. I wanted to make a fair deal, buy the property for a reasonable price and settle a century-old dispute. 200,000 reais is not a reasonable price for 1,000 hectares of land, and you know it. Richard was silent for a moment, then sighed. Fine. The truth is this land is worth far more than 200,000 reais. Recent geological studies indicate significant mineral reserves in the region. Rebecca's eyes widened. Mineral reserves? You never told me anything about that. Because you didn't need to know. The deal was simple. You sell me the property, pay off your debts, and everyone is happy. Everyone except me, Dorothy said coldly. You would have been in a comfortable nursing home with all the necessary medical care, based on a false diagnosis that I was losing my sanity. The diagnosis wasn't false, Rebecca protested. You really were showing signs of confusion, signs that you deliberately provoked to make me seem incompetent. Dorothy now remembered details she had ignored at the time. The leading questions during the medical appointments, always with Rebecca whispering worrying information to the doctors. The medicine her daughter insisted she take, saying they were vitamins, but which left her drowsy and confused. You drugged me, she said with growing indignation. You gave me medication to make me confused, and then used that as proof I was becoming senile. Mother, that's paranoia. Is it paranoia? Then explain to me why I'm completely lucid after 4 days, without taking the vitamins you always insisted I swallow. Rebecca couldn't answer. Richard realized the situation was getting out of control. Look, everyone made mistakes here, but we can still reach a civilized agreement. I'll increase the offer to 300,000 reais. You keep a portion of the property and— No, Dorothy interrupted him. What do you mean, no? I said no. I won't sell an inch of this land to you or anyone in your family. Mrs. Mitchell, be rational. You don't have the money to fund a lawsuit. Even if those documents are valid, it will take years to prove it in court. Then let it take years. I have time. But Rebecca doesn't. Her debts won't wait. Dorothy looked at her daughter, who was visibly shaken. Are the debts real, Rebecca? They are, Mom. I got involved in some ventures that didn't work out, invested money I didn't have, took out loans. Why didn't you tell me the truth? We could have talked, found a solution together. Because you would have judged me. You would have said I'm incompetent, that I don't know how to manage my affairs. And when have I ever said anything like that in my life? Rebecca fell silent because she knew her mother was right. Dorothy had never been judgmental or critical of her daughter's choices. Quite the opposite, she had always supported and encouraged her career. How much do you owe? Dorothy asked softly. $400,000. And how much did Richard offer you for the part of the property you already sold? $50,000. Dorothy did the math quickly. If the entire property was worth at least $2 million, considering the mineral reserves and the true extent of the land, $50,000 for a part of it was practically theft. Richard, she turned to the man, you knew about my daughter's financial difficulties from the start, didn't you? I found out by chance when she came to me for some legal services. What kind of services? Consultation on real estate matters. About this specific property? Richard hesitated. Yes. And was it you who suggested she obtain a power of attorney to manage my assets? I only mentioned it would be easier to resolve bureaucratic issues. And was it you who advised her on how to get a medical certificate stating I was mentally incompetent? I merely gave some tips on how to document concerning behaviors. Dorothy turned to Rebecca. And you, daughter? When did you start following this man's advice instead of talking to me about your problems? Mom, I tried, but every time I talked about financial matters, you changed the subject to talk about the stories of our great-grandfather William. Because I was trying to tell you that we had resources, that our family owned assets worth much more than we imagined. But I thought they were fantasies, because he, Dorothy pointed at Richard, convinced you they were fantasies, because it was convenient for him that you believed that. Richard decided to try a different approach. Mrs. Mitchell, even if all this is true, the fact is that Rebecca has already sold a part of the property to me. The transaction was legal. It's registered with the county. I have acquired rights over that area. What area exactly? The southern part of the property, 20 acres with access to the main road. Dorothy knew that area well. It was precisely where the most valuable part of the property was located, with 2 water springs and the best land for agriculture. And you casually chose the most valuable part of the property to buy. I chose the part with the best road access, that's all. Richard, Dorothy said in a firm voice, I want you to leave my property now. Mrs. Mitchell, there's no use trying to reverse a completed sale. I told you to get out of here, Dorothy shouted, and Toffee and Honey began barking aggressively. Richard took a few steps back. The dogs really seemed willing to attack him if he didn't obey. All right, I'll leave for now, but this isn't over. I have legal rights to part of this property, and I will exercise them. He returned to his car and drove off, raising a cloud of dust. As soon as he disappeared from view, Rebecca broke down in tears. "Mom, I ruined everything. I ruined our family, our property. I ruined everything." Dorothy approached her daughter and hugged her. "Daughter, you were manipulated by an experienced and ill-intentioned man. That doesn't make you a bad person. But I doubted you. I thought you were going crazy when you were actually trying to save me from making a mistake. You were afraid, and fear makes us make wrong decisions sometimes." They held each other for a long time, while Toffee and Honey came closer to comfort them too. The sun began to set between the trees, tinting everything gold. "Mom, what are we going to do now?" "First, we're going back to the city, and you're going to show me all the documents related to the sale you made to Richard. And then we're going to find a lawyer who specializes in land issues to analyze the documents I found here. But Mom, I don't have money to pay for a specialized lawyer." "Honey, if these documents prove what I think they will, any competent lawyer will agree to work for a percentage of the final outcome." They began to pack up the few things that were in the tent. Dorothy kept the historical documents always close to her, wrapped in protective plastic. "Mom, can I ask you something? Can I?" "Of course. Did you really never suspect that I had ulterior motives?" Dorothy stopped folding the tent canvas and looked into her daughter's eyes. "Honey, a mother always suspects when something isn't right with her children. I noticed you were acting strange, anxious, avoiding certain conversations, but I never imagined you were capable of abandoning me in the woods." "I didn't want to abandon you, Mom. Richard convinced me it would only be for one night, that it would be good for you to have some time alone in the place you always loved." "And when did you decide to leave me here for 4 days?" Rebecca lowered her head, ashamed. "Richard said you needed more time to find what you were looking for. He knew the dogs would guide me to the documents. He said it was possible, but that it might take a few days. And if I hadn't found anything, were you going to leave me here to die?" "No, never. I was going to come back in a week at most. A week alone, without food, without medicine, without communication. Mom, I know it was terrible. I know there's no excuse. But Richard convinced me it was the only way to solve our financial problems without having to commit you to a psychiatric hospital. He threatened to commit you to a psychiatric hospital. He said if I didn't agree with his plan, he would go to the district attorney's office and report that I was being negligent with an elderly, mentally incompetent mother." Dorothy began to understand the extent of the manipulation Richard had exerted over Rebecca. He had used her daughter's 2 main weaknesses, the fear of being considered professionally incompetent and the fear of being held responsible for family negligence. "Honey, Richard is much more dangerous than I imagined. He's not just an opportunist interested in our property. He's someone who studies people, who identifies their vulnerabilities and exploits them systematically." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. He discovered your financial problems, discovered your insecurities about my mental health, discovered my stories about the family documents, and orchestrated a plan that would turn all that information to his advantage." They finished packing and walked to Rebecca's car. The dogs followed them naturally. "Mom, what do we do with Toffee and Honey? They're coming with us." "But Mom, they were trained by Richard. They were trained to find the documents, not to harm me. In fact, they saved me. They guided me to water, helped me discover the structures, kept me company when I was alone and scared." Dorothy opened the back door of the car, and the dogs jumped in as if they had always done that. During the trip back to the city, Rebecca told more details about how she had met Richard and how he had gradually taken control of the situation. "He showed up at my office about 6 months ago, saying he needed legal consultation for family inheritance matters. He paid very well for the services, and when he found out I was having financial difficulties, he started suggesting solutions." "What kind of solutions?" "First, he said he knew investors interested in rural properties in our region. When I mentioned that we had family land, he became very interested. And when did you tell him about my stories of the hidden documents?" "It was in a casual conversation. I was venting about how hard it was to take care of an elderly mother who was starting to have episodes. Episodes that only started after you began giving me those medications. Mother, The medications were prescribed by the doctor. A doctor you chose after talking to Richard about my mental conditions. Rebecca fell silent, beginning to realize how she had been manipulated at every step of the process. When they reached the city, it was already night. Rebecca lived in a small apartment downtown, and Dorothy was surprised to see how her daughter's living conditions had deteriorated. There were stacks of case files on every available surface, overdue bills piled on the kitchen table, and a practically empty refrigerator. "Honey, how long have you been living like this?" "Since I started having problems at the office, about 8 months." "And why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed, Mother, ashamed to admit I couldn't make my career work." Dorothy made a simple tea for them both, while Rebecca gathered all the documents related to the property sale to Richard. "Mother, here's everything. The purchase and sale contract, the receipts, the deed." Dorothy examined the papers carefully. Having worked in a county clerk's office for 20 years before retiring, she was well versed in real estate transaction procedures. "Rebecca, this contract has several irregularities." "What do you mean?" "The amount paid is well below market value, even considering just the 50 acres you sold. And the land description is too vague. Richard said that was normal for rural transactions." Richard lied. "And look here," Dorothy pointed to a clause at the end of the contract. "This clause gives him the right of first refusal on the rest of the property if you decide to sell. He told me it was just a formality. Honey, with this clause, if we wanted to sell the rest of the property to someone else, we would be forced to offer it to Richard first, for the same price he paid for the first 50 acres. That means he was going to get the entire property for $50,000 when it's actually worth millions." Rebecca ran her hand over her face, exhausted. "Mother, I was so naive." "You were deceived by someone who does this professionally. Don't blame yourself so much." They stayed up late, organizing all the documents and planning the next steps. Toffee and Honey settled on the living room rug, as if they had always lived there. The next morning, Rebecca called a lawyer colleague who specialized in land issues and had studied with her in university. "Mr. Harper, it's Rebecca Mitchell. I really need to speak with you about an urgent matter related to my family." The lawyer agreed to see them that same afternoon. Benjamin Harper was a man in his early 50s, with solid experience in land disputes and rural property issues. When Rebecca and Dorothy arrived at his office, with a folder full of historical documents and contracts, he immediately realized this was something complex. "Let me understand the situation," said Benjamin after hearing the full account. "You've discovered century-old documents that prove your family owns a much larger area than you thought, but part of that area has already been irregularly sold to someone who may have orchestrated this entire situation?" "Exactly," Dorothy confirmed. "And this Richard Crawford, do you know anything more about him beyond what he's told us? We know he has detailed knowledge of the region's history and that he's apparently been planning this operation for a long time," Rebecca explained. Benjamin picked up the historical documents and examined them carefully with a magnifying glass. "These documents appear authentic. The paper has the correct texture for the period. The ink has the appropriate appearance, and these official stamps are very difficult to forge. But we'll need a technical examination to be sure." "What about the sales contract my daughter signed?" "This contract has several irregularities that can be challenged in court. The price is obviously below market value, the land description is imprecise, and this right of first refusal clause is abusive. So we have a chance to annul the sale. We have a good chance, especially if we can prove bad faith on the part of the buyer." Benjamin explained that a full investigation into Richard Crawford, his background and his connections to the region would be necessary. "I'll hire a private detective to investigate this man. Sometimes people who operate schemes like this have done similar things in the past." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. While Benjamin initiated the legal investigations, Dorothy and Rebecca returned to the rural property to conduct a more detailed analysis of the documents found and search for additional evidence. This time they were accompanied by a historical documents expert, recommended by Benjamin. Dr. Charles Anderson was a history professor at the State University and an expert in archives from the 19th and early 20th centuries. "Mrs. Mitchell," said Dr. Charles after examining the papers, "these documents are not just authentic, they are extraordinary. We have here correspondence that documents one of the most important land disputes in the region at the beginning of the last century." "Important how?" "Your family, the Mitchells, were the original owners of an area that included not only these lands, but also parts of what are now very valuable farms belonging to other families in the region." "You mean other people might also be occupying land that actually belongs to us?" "It's very likely, and even more interesting. Some of the letters mention that the dispute wasn't just about property boundaries, but about mineral rights." Dr. Charles showed one of the letters where William Mitchell mentioned the stones that shine in the creek and the metal the foreigners want to buy. In the context of the time, this likely refers to alluvial gold and possibly other minerals that were valued for export. And are these mineral rights still valid today? If the original ownership documents are recognized by the courts, yes, you would have rights not only to the land, but also to the mineral resources within it. The revelation left Rebecca astonished. She began to understand why Richard was so interested in the property and why he had been so meticulous in his plan to acquire it. "Dr. Charles, is it possible that this Richard Crawford knew about the mineral rights? If he truly is from the family that disputed these lands with your great-grandfather, it's very likely he has family documents or information on the matter. Families in the region hold memories of these issues for generations." They spent the rest of the day cataloguing all the documents found and searching for additional structures on the property. Guided by William Mitchell's letters, they discovered 2 other small chambers excavated in rock, containing more correspondence and some personal items. One of the most important discoveries was a rudimentary map drawn by William himself, showing the original boundaries of the property and marking locations where he had found signs of wealth in the land. "This map will be crucial to prove our claim about the property's original extent," explained Dr. Charles. When they returned to the city in the late afternoon, Benjamin already had news from the investigations into Richard. "You won't believe what we've uncovered about this man," he said as soon as they arrived at the office. "What?" "Richard Crawford isn't just an opportunist interested in your property. He's part of a much larger and more organized operation." Benjamin showed a folder with documents the detective had managed to gather in just one day of investigation. Over the last 5 years, Richard has been involved in at least 12 real estate transactions in the region, all following a similar pattern. He identifies families with financial troubles who own old rural properties, investigates the land's history, and then orchestrates situations to acquire them for well below market value. How does he manage to do this repeatedly? He has a team, a doctor who produces reports of mental incapacity when needed, a notary's office that processes documents with suspicious speed, and contacts in mining companies that conduct discrete geological studies on properties he's interested in. Rebecca was horrified. "Does this mean other families have gone through the same thing as us?" "Exactly. And some of those families lost properties that had been in the family for generations, just like you almost did. But how can he keep operating if he's done this so many times? Because he's very careful to keep everything technically legal. The contracts he drafts are legally valid, even if they're abusive. The medical reports are produced by licensed professionals, even if based on false information, and he always pays taxes correctly on the properties he acquires, to avoid drawing attention from the authorities." Benjamin explained that Richard had amassed a fortune of millions of dollars through these operations, and that several of the properties he had acquired were later sold to mining companies for much higher prices than he had paid. "Your property would have just been another one on his list. And what can we do to stop him?" "First, we nullify the sale Rebecca made to him. With the irregularities in the contract and the evidence of fraud, that shouldn't be difficult. Second, we sue him for fraud and racketeering." "Racketeering?" "Yes. With the doctor, the notary, and the other collaborators, Richard is running a criminal organization, even if each individual action might seem legal." Benjamin suggested they contact other families who had been victims of Richard, to form a mutual support group and strengthen the legal actions. United, you have a much better chance of success than fighting individually. In the following days, Benjamin managed to contact 6 families who had sold properties to Richard in recent years. Each story was similar: financial troubles, psychological pressure, questionable medical reports, and abusive contracts. The meeting with these families took place at Dorothy's house, who had decided to move back to the rural property to protect it from new attempts of intrusion by Richard. Mrs. Evelyn Thompson, 72 years old, was the first to speak. "My husband had Alzheimer's, and Richard showed up saying he could help us sell our farm to pay for his treatment. But the price he offered barely covered 6 months of medication." Mr. Harold Jenkins, 68 years old, told a similar story. "My wife fell ill, needed urgent surgery, and Richard appeared like a saving angel offering quick money for our property. Only later did we discover our land was worth 10 times what he paid." Every account confirmed Richard's pattern of behavior. He would approach families in moments of vulnerability, offer quick solutions to urgent problems, and then take possession of valuable properties for ridiculous prices. "But my goodness," said Dorothy, "if he did this to so many families, why did no one ever report him?" "Because he always made sure the victims remained in a position of dependency," explained Benjamin. "He offered additional financial help after the purchase, but always on the condition that the families not question the transaction." "How so?" "For example, in Mrs. Evelyn's case, after buying the farm, Richard offered a loan to cover her husband's treatment. But the loan contract included a clause that if she questioned the sale of the farm, the loan would become immediately due with exorbitant interest. It was a subtle but effective system of blackmail. Families were trapped in a web of financial dependency that prevented them from reacting against the abuses." "And now?" asked Harold. "Is it possible to reverse these sales after so much time?" "With the discovery of Dorothy's historical documents, we have a new perspective on the whole situation," explained Benjamin. "If we can prove that Richard had prior knowledge about the real value of these properties and concealed that information during negotiations, we can characterize it as fraud." The lawyer explained that the documents found by Dorothy didn't just refer to her property, but to the entire region. William Mitchell had mapped a very extensive area, and his notes on mineral resources could apply to several of the farms Richard had acquired. "This means you all may have rights to properties far more valuable than you imagined." They decided to formally form a mutual support group with Dorothy as leader, since she was the person who discovered the key evidence for the case. In the following weeks, the group worked intensively to gather all possible evidence against Richard. Each family contributed documents, contracts, and testimonies about the circumstances of the sales they had made. During this period, Richard tried several times to intimidate the families. He showed up at Mrs. Evelyn's house offering an additional compensation if she gave up participating in the group. When she refused, he threatened to immediately call in the loan he had made to her. "Mrs. Evelyn," said Benjamin when she told him about the visit, "this is additional proof that he was operating a criminal scheme. Honest people don't blackmail." Richard also tried a different approach with Dorothy and Rebecca. He sent a lawyer representing him with a proposal for a friendly agreement. "My client is willing to return the area he bought from your daughter Rebecca in exchange for compensation of 100,000 rees for the investments he has already made in the property." "What investments, Mace?" asked Dorothy. "Geological studies, land demarcation, development projects?" "Geological studies that proved our property is worth millions of rees." Richard's lawyer tried to downplay the importance of the geological studies, but his evasiveness only confirmed that significant discoveries had been made on the property. "Tell your client," replied Benjamin, "that there will be no agreement. If he wants to keep the area he bought, he'll have to prove in court that the transaction was honest and transparent." While the legal proceedings were underway, Dorothy decided to turn part of her property into a sanctuary for abandoned animals. Toffee and Honey became the first official residents of the sanctuary, and other rescued animals began arriving little by little. "Mom, isn't this going to cost a fortune?" asked Rebecca, worried about the expenses. "My dear, if we really found what I think we found, money won't be a problem. To support the sanctuary while the legal matters were being resolved, Dorothy decided to open the property for tourist visits on weekends. The discovered historical structures, the springs of crystal-clear water, and the rescued animals attracted visitors from all over the region. The property became known as Hidden Treasure Farm, and Dorothy's stories about the discovery of the documents spread through local newspapers and social media. The publicity ended up bringing unexpected benefits. A retired geologist who visited the property recognized some of the rock formations described in William Mitchell's documents and confirmed that the region truly had significant mineral potential. "Mrs. Mitchell," said Professor Henry Rockwell, the geologist, "your great-grandfather had impressive technical knowledge for his time. His descriptions of shining stones and red earth with gleaming veins are consistent with gold deposits and possibly other precious minerals. And what does that mean in practical terms? It means your property may have even greater value than you imagined. If tests confirm the presence of minerals in commercial quantities, you could lease the exploration rights for millions of dollars without even needing to sell the land." The confirmation of the mineral potential gave even more strength to the court case. Benjamin argued that Richard had concealed crucial information about the property's value, clearly characterizing the crime of fraud. 6 months after the investigations began, the district attorney's office decided to open a criminal inquiry against Richard and his team. The evidence gathered by the group of families was enough to characterize the formation of a criminal organization, fraud, and document forgery. Richard was arrested as a preventive measure when he tried to quickly sell several of the properties he had acquired, in a clear attempt to hide assets before the court decisions. The doctor who produced false reports lost his professional license and was also indicted. The notary office that processed irregular documents was investigated, and several employees were fired. During the trial, which became one of the most talked-about cases in the region, it was proven that Richard had harmed dozens of families over 5 years, amassing fraudulent assets worth more than $10 million. All the sales he had made were annulled by the court, and the families recovered their properties. Furthermore, they received compensation for the moral and material damages suffered. In the specific case of Dorothy and Rebecca, the court recognized not only the annulment of the partial sale that Rebecca had made, but also the historical rights of the family over a much larger area, as proven by William Mitchell's documents. The official property of the Mitchell family increased from 50 to 800 acres, including areas that had been irregularly occupied by other owners over the decades. With the recognition of the mineral rights, Dorothy and Rebecca leased part of the property to a responsible mining company, which guaranteed sustainable exploration without harming the environment or the animal sanctuary. The monthly income from the lease was enough not only to maintain the sanctuary, but also to transform it into a reference center for environmental conservation and ecological education. Rebecca managed to pay off all her debts and expand her law firm, specializing in land rights defense and protecting rural families against schemes similar to what they had faced. 5 years after the discovery in the woods, Hidden Treasure Farm became a national example of how preserving family memory and fighting for legitimate rights can transform not just the life of one family, but an entire community. The sanctuary housed over 100 rescued animals and employed 15 people from the region. The historical structures were listed as cultural heritage, and the property received visitors from across the country interested in the Mitchell family history and environmental conservation. Dorothy, now 73, became a sought-after speaker on senior rights, family memory preservation, and resistance against real estate fraud. Her story inspired the creation of stricter laws against schemes to appropriate land from the elderly. Rebecca became one of the most respected land rights attorneys in the region, and mother and daughter worked together not only on the family business but also helping other families going through similar situations. The relationship between the two, which had been nearly destroyed by Richard's manipulation, became stronger than ever. They learned that mutual trust and honest communication are the most valuable treasures a family can have. Toffee and Honey, the dogs that had been instruments of manipulation but became symbols of loyalty and protection, lived happily as guardians of the sanctuary. They had been trained to find hidden things, but ended up finding something far more valuable, a family united by truth and love. One Sunday morning, as she watched visitors delight in the rescued animals and listen attentively to the stories about William Mitchell, Dorothy reflected on everything that had happened. If Rebecca hadn't abandoned her in the woods that terrible night, they might never have discovered the documents. If Richard hadn't been so greedy and manipulative, perhaps they would never have found the strength to fight for their rights. Sometimes life's most difficult situations end up being the paths that lead us to the most important discoveries. The abandonment had transformed into liberation. The manipulation had transformed into wisdom. And what seemed like the end of a family became the beginning of something much greater. Dorothy smiled as she watched Rebecca explaining to a group of children how to care for the rescued animals. Her daughter had learned that true success in life doesn't come from accumulating wealth or winning at any cost, but from using our talents to protect those who need protection. And she herself had learned that age is not a limitation, but an opportunity to use all accumulated experience to make a difference in the world. In the afternoon, when the last visitors had left and the sanctuary fell silent, Dorothy and Rebecca sat on the porch of the house they had built near the historical structures. Toffee and Honey settled at their feet, and together they watched the sunset paint the trees in the woods where it all began with a golden hue. "Mother," Rebecca said softly, "I still feel guilty for what I did to you that night." "Daughter," Dorothy replied, stroking her daughter's hair, "if you hadn't done what you did, we would never have discovered what we are truly capable of accomplishing together. But I could have lost you. Something terrible could have happened. It could have, but it didn't. And do you know why? Why? Because deep in your heart, you knew I was stronger than I seemed. You abandoned me in that forest because deep down, you believed I would be able to survive and find what I was looking for. Do you really think that's what it was? I'm certain. Mothers and daughters have a connection that goes beyond the conscious. You led me exactly where I needed to be, at the exact moment I needed to be there." They fell silent for a moment, absorbing the peace of the evening and the satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. "And now, Mother? What more can we do with all this wealth and influence we've gained?" Dorothy smiled. "My dear, we'll keep doing what we've always done. Take care of our family, protect those who need protection, and never forget where we came from. And will we keep working together? Forever, because now I know you truly understand me, and you know you can trust me completely. I love you, Mother, and I love you too, my daughter, more than all the lands, all the treasures, and all the ancient documents in the world." That night, as they prepared for bed in the house they had built together, Dorothy took one of the original letters from William Mitchell that she always kept close. "Rebecca, come here. I want to read something to you." Rebecca approached, and Dorothy read aloud the final part of the letter her great-grandfather had written before leaving for the war. "To my dear descendants, if you are reading this, it is because you have overcome all difficulties and have found not only the documents I hid, but also have found each other. The true wealth of a family lies not in the land it owns, but in the love its members manage to keep alive through the generations. Take care of each other, protect each other, and never forget that the greatest treasure I can leave you is the certainty that you belong to a lineage of strong, courageous people willing to fight for what is right. With all my eternal love, William Mitchell." When Dorothy finished reading, both had tears in their eyes. "Mother, it's as if great-grandfather William knew exactly what would happen to us. Perhaps he did, or perhaps that's just how true love works. It always finds a way to guide us to where we need to be." They said goodnight and went to their rooms. But before falling asleep, Dorothy looked out the window toward the forest where it all began. Toffee and Honey were making their nightly rounds, protecting the property as they always did. Somewhere among those trees, the marks of where she had pitched her tent on that first terrible night still remained. But now, instead of painful memories, that place represented the beginning of a new life for her and for Rebecca. A life built on truth, courage, and unconditional love. Dorothy fell asleep smiling, knowing that William Mitchell would be proud of what his descendants had managed to build upon the foundations he had left more than a century ago. And in her dreams, she saw him walking the property, observing with satisfaction the thriving sanctuary, the united family, and the land protected for future generations. The hidden treasure had been found. It wasn't gold or precious stones, but something far more valuable. The strength of a family that learned to trust again in the love that had always existed between them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 2 years had passed since the resolution of the court case, and life at Hidden Treasure Farm had settled into a harmonious and prosperous rhythm. Dorothy, now 75 years old, woke every morning before sunrise for her morning walk around the property, always accompanied by the faithful Toffee and Honey. On that particular morning, as she walked along the trail leading to the historical structures, Dorothy noticed something different. There were signs that someone had been tampering with the area during the night. Small holes had been dug near the first stone structure, and some of the plants she and Rebecca had cultivated around the site were trampled. Toffee was sniffing the ground intensely, clearly detecting the scent of strangers. Honey circled nervously around Dorothy, as she always did when she sensed something was wrong. "What do you think, boys?" she whispered to the dogs. "Did someone come looking for something here?" Back at the house, Dorothy told Rebecca about the discovery, who was having coffee and reviewing some case files before heading to the office. "Mom, it could have been some wild animal digging. Rebecca, I know the difference between an animal hole and one made by people. Someone was looking for something there." "But who? Richard has been in prison for 2 years. But his family isn't." Rebecca stopped stirring her coffee and looked at her mother carefully. "Do you think it could be revenge?" "I don't know, but I think we should stay alert." During the day, while receiving the sanctuary's usual visitors, Dorothy paid special attention to anyone who seemed more interested in the historical structures than in the animals. 2 people caught her attention: a middle-aged man who asked very specific questions about the documents found, and a young woman who photographed the inscriptions on the stones in detail. That night, after all the visitors had left, Dorothy decided to investigate more deeply. She and Rebecca walked to the site of the unauthorized excavations with powerful flashlights. "Mum, look at this," Rebecca pointed to marks on the ground. "These are boot prints, and look at the shape of the holes. They were made with proper digging tools. Someone who knows exactly what they're looking for." They followed the footprints, which led from the first structure to the second, where the most important documents had been found. There were even clearer signs of systematic digging. "Mum, what if they're looking for documents we haven't found yet?" The possibility hadn't occurred to Dorothy until that moment. In William Mitchell's letters, he mentioned having hidden everything that was important, but he never specified if everything referred only to the documents they had found or if there was more material hidden elsewhere. "Honey, let's reread our great-grandfather's letters tomorrow. Maybe there's a clue we didn't notice the first time." The next morning, they dedicated themselves to re-examining all the historical documents with a new focus. Dr. Charles Anderson, the historian who had helped authenticate the papers, came to visit to assist with the analysis. "Professor Charles, do you think it's possible that William hid more documents beyond the ones we've already found?" "It's very likely, Mrs. Mitchell. Men like your great-grandfather, who lived through periods of great political and social instability, often divided their important documents into several security reserves." "How so?" "They never put everything in one place, for fear that if one hiding place was discovered, all the documentation would be lost." Dr. Charles pointed to one of the letters where William mentioned the 3 stones that guard our secrets. "You found 2 stone structures. It's possible there is a third." The revelation made Dorothy's heart race. If there were more documents hidden, that would explain why someone was digging clandestinely on the property. And how could we find this third structure? We would need to follow the instructions in the letters more literally. Your great-grandfather was meticulous. He left precise clues. They spent the rest of the day analyzing every word of the letters, searching for geographical references that hadn't been fully explored. One phrase caught Dr. Charles's special attention. "Where the water sings loudest beneath the stone that points to the sunrise, lies guarded what cannot be lost." This description doesn't match any of the structures you found, does it? "No," confirmed Dorothy. The other structures are near the spring, but not in a place where the water sings loudest. That probably refers to a waterfall or rapids. Rebecca knew the property well, but had never systematically explored all the springs and watercourses. "Mum, the main spring flows down the land and forms some rapids further down. We never went to check that area completely." "Then that's where we should look." The next day, equipped with metal detectors borrowed from an archaeologist friend of Dr. Charles, they set out to explore the lower areas of the property, where the stream formed small waterfalls and rapids. Toffee and Honey, who had already grown accustomed to participating in the family's discovery expeditions, ran ahead, obviously excited about the new adventure. It was Honey who found the spot. The dog stopped abruptly in front of an interesting rock formation, a large flat stone positioned to point exactly east, near a small waterfall where the sound of the water was indeed louder than in other parts of the stream. "Where the water sings loudest, beneath the stone that points to the sunrise," Dorothy repeated the phrase from the letter. "It's here." The metal detector confirmed the presence of metal objects buried beneath the stone, but removing the stone proved a more complex task than they had imagined. It was too heavy for 2 people to move alone. "We're going to need help," said Rebecca. "And we're going to need discretion," added Dorothy. "If someone is looking for these things at night, we can't draw attention." They decided to ask Benjamin, the lawyer, for help, who brought 2 trusted workers the following Sunday. With proper equipment, they managed to carefully move the stone without damaging what might be buried underneath. What they found exceeded all expectations. There were not just 1, but 3 metal boxes buried in separate compartments. The first contained more documents, including detailed maps of the entire region with markings of natural resources. The second contained personal items belonging to William Mitchell, photographs, love letters from his wife, and some items of sentimental value. But it was the third box that brought the biggest surprise. Inside it, carefully wrapped in waterproof cloth, was a document that would completely change their understanding of the family's history and the reasons why Richard Crawford had been so persistent in wanting to acquire the property. It was a mineral rights lease agreement signed between William Mitchell and a British mining company in 1923. The contract granted the company exploration rights for 99 years, with payment of substantial royalties to the Mitchell family. 99 years, calculated Rebecca. That means the contract is still valid until 2022. No, dear. Look at the date more carefully. Rebecca examined the document again and realized she had misread it. The contract had been signed in December 1923, which meant it was valid until December 2022. "Mum, this contract expired 2 years ago." "Exactly. And look here at the automatic renewal clause. The document specified that if the legitimate heirs of William Mitchell were in legal possession of the property at the time of expiration, the contract would be automatically renewed for another 99 years, with royalty amounts adjusted for inflation and current mineral prices. This means that if this English company still exists, and if there are still minerals on the property, we are entitled to royalties that could be worth millions of dollars a year." Dr. Charles examined the document carefully. "This is a very common type of contract in the colonial and post-colonial era. European companies made long-term agreements with local landowners for the exploitation of natural resources." "And how do we know if the company still exists?" "We'll need to investigate. But mining companies, especially English ones, have a very strong tradition of corporate continuity. It's very likely that it still exists, even if it has changed its name or incorporated other companies." Benjamin was tasked with researching the legal status of the company mentioned in the contract, British Mining Company of Appalachia Limited. While awaiting the research results, Dorothy and Rebecca reinforced the property's security. They hired 2 night guards and installed security cameras at the most sensitive points. The precaution proved necessary. 3 nights later, the cameras recorded 2 people trying to dig near the historical structures. The guards managed to chase them away, but not before identifying that one of them was a young woman who had visited the property a few days earlier, asking questions about the documents. "Benjamin," said Dorothy on the phone, We need to find out who these people are and what they're looking for. I'm already on it. I hired the same detective who investigated Richard, and I have news about the English company. Good or bad? Excellent. The British Mining Company of Appalachia not only still exists but has become one of the largest mining companies in England. They have operations in dozens of countries and annual revenue of billions of pounds. And the contract? It's valid. They have a record of the original contract in their archives, and according to international law, contracts of this nature are automatically renewable if the specified conditions are met. What conditions? That the legitimate heirs are in legal possession of the property at the time of renewal, and that there has been no breach of the original clauses by either party. Benjamin explained that the company had already been approached by other people trying to negotiate rights over the Mitchell property, but they had always refused because they couldn't prove legitimate ownership. You mean Richard wasn't the only one interested in this contract? Exactly, and that explains why people are digging on your property at night. There are other people who know about the contract and are trying to find documents that prove rights to the property. The revelation made Dorothy understand that they were dealing with something much bigger than they had imagined. It wasn't just a local case of real estate fraud, but an international dispute involving mineral rights worth fortunes. Benjamin, what should we do? First, we will officially contact the English company and notify them that the legitimate heirs are claiming the contract rights. Second, we will find out who the other interested parties are and what the legal basis of their claims is. 2 days later, Benjamin had worrying information. Dorothy, the woman caught digging on the property is a lawyer representing a group of international investors. They claim to have documents proving that William Mitchell sold his mineral rights before leaving for the war. Is that possible? It's possible, but unlikely. If it were true, why would William have hidden the original contract instead of destroying it? And how did they know about the contract's existence? That is the fundamental question. The only way they could have known is if they had access to the English company's archives, or if someone with knowledge of the situation had leaked the information. Benjamin suspected that Richard Crawford, even imprisoned, was still operating through third parties to try to appropriate the mineral rights to the property. He must have discovered the contract during his research for the original scheme and passed the information to partners who were left out when he was arrested. The situation was becoming too complex to be resolved only at the local level. Benjamin suggested hiring a law firm specialized in international law to handle the legal aspects involving the English company. "And how much will that cost?" asked Rebecca. "A lot. But if the contract is validated, the annual royalties will cover the legal costs in a matter of months." While the legal matters developed, Dorothy made a decision that surprised everyone. "I want to make a deal with the English company." "What do you mean, Mum?" "Instead of just renewing the royalty contract, I want to propose a different partnership." Dorothy explained her idea. Instead of simply leasing the mineral rights, she wanted the English company to invest in the sustainable development of the region, creating local jobs and preserving the environment. My proposal is that they invest part of the mining profits in social and environmental projects in the region, including the expansion of our animal sanctuary. "Mom, that's a great idea, but do you think they'll accept?" Modern companies are always looking for ways to improve their corporate image, and a partnership with a world-renowned animal sanctuary would be great publicity for them. Benjamin was tasked with drafting the formal proposal. Meanwhile, the security of the property remained a constant concern. A week later, there was a more serious attempted break-in. 5 people tried to enter the property in the early hours, equipped with metal detectors and digging tools. The guards called the police, but the intruders fled before the authorities arrived. "Mum, this is getting dangerous," said Rebecca. "Maybe we should move to the city temporarily until the situation is resolved." "Never. This is our land, and no one is going to drive us out of here." Dorothy decided to adopt a more active strategy. Instead of just defending, she resolved to find out exactly who the other parties interested in the mineral rights were and confront them directly. With the help of the detective hired by Benjamin, they discovered that the investor group was led by none other than Richard Crawford's family. His older brother, Maurice Crawford, had taken over the family business after Richard's arrest. "So it's a personal matter," said Dorothy. "They want revenge on us and still profit from it." "It seems so, and they have considerable resources to fund a prolonged legal dispute." But Dorothy was not intimidated. At 75 years old, after everything she had faced, she felt stronger and more determined than ever. "Benjamin, I want to schedule a meeting with this Maurice Crawford." "Mrs. Dorothy, that could be risky." "Benjamin, I will not live in fear. If they want to negotiate, we'll negotiate. If they want to fight, we'll fight. But let's settle this once and for all." The meeting was scheduled for the following week at Benjamin's office, with lawyers from both sides present. Maurice Crawford was very different from his brother Richard. Where Richard was charming and manipulative, Maurice was direct and aggressive. He arrived at the meeting with 3 lawyers and a briefcase full of documents. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said without preliminary greetings, "I've come here to make a civilized proposal to resolve this situation." "What proposal?" "My family has documents proving that William Mitchell sold the mineral rights to the property in 1924, 1 year after signing the contract with the English company. Technically, the contract is invalid." "What documents?" Maurice showed a seemingly authentic deed, dated March 1924, in which William Mitchell sold all rights to the property's natural resources to Henry Crawford, Maurice's great-grandfather, for a sum of money specified in the document. Benjamin examined the deed carefully. "This document looks authentic, but we'll need a technical examination to be sure." "You can do all the examinations you want," said Maurice. "In the meantime, I propose we make a deal. We split the royalties 50-50, and everyone is satisfied." "And if your documents are fake?" asked Dorothy. "And if they're real, you lose everything." The meeting ended without an agreement. Maurice gave Dorothy a week to decide, threatening that if she didn't accept the proposal, he would file a lawsuit to challenge all the Mitchell family's rights to the property. "Benjamin," said Dorothy after Maurice left, "their document is fake." "How can you be so sure?" "Because my great-grandfather would never have sold the mineral rights 1 year after signing the contract with the English company. It makes no sense economically or strategically. But how can we prove it? We need to find more evidence, and I think I know where to look." Dorothy remembered a phrase in William's letters that had always intrigued her. "What I wrote with my right hand, I recorded with my left." "Dr. Anderson," she called the historian, "can you help us with a question about handwriting?" "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. What is it about?" "We need to compare the signature on different documents to verify authenticity." Dr. Anderson examined both the deed presented by Maurice and the original letters of William Mitchell. "Mrs. Mitchell, there are significant discrepancies between the signatures." "How so?" "The signature on the 1924 deed appears to have been made by someone trying to imitate William Mitchell's handwriting, but there are technical details that indicate it was not made by the same person." "What kind of details?" "The pen pressure, the angle of the letters, small flourishes that are impossible to perfectly imitate. Furthermore, there is a chronological problem." "What problem?" "The type of ink used in the deed was not commercially available in 1924. It's an ink that only began to be produced in the 1930s. The discovery was the final blow to Maurice's strategy. Benjamin immediately requested an official technical examination, which confirmed Dr. Anderson's conclusions. The deed presented by the Crawford family was an elaborate forgery, but detectable through modern technical analysis. "Benjamin, now we sue them for document forgery, right?" "Exactly. And that will strengthen our position in the negotiations with the English company. With the forgeries exposed and the Mitchell family's rights clearly established, the British Mining Company of Appalachia Limited agreed to begin formal negotiations for the renewal of the contract. The company's representative, Mr. James Wellington, came to the United States specifically to see the property and discuss the terms of the new partnership. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said during the visit, "our company is very interested in the sustainable development proposal you presented. Why? Because the world is changing. Mining companies can no longer operate thinking only about profit. We need to consider the social and environmental impact of our activities. Mr. Wellington explained that the company had a global investment program for environmental conservation and community development projects. Your proposal to expand the animal sanctuary and create educational programs aligns perfectly with our corporate goals. The negotiations lasted 3 months, but the final outcome exceeded all expectations of Dorothy and Rebecca. The new contract included not only substantial royalties for the mineral rights, but also a social investment fund of 2 million reais annually for projects in the region. Part of this money would be allocated to expanding the sanctuary, part to educational programs in local schools, and part to environmental conservation projects throughout the area. "Mom," said Rebecca on the day of the contract signing, "when you were abandoned in that tent in the woods, did you imagine it would lead to something so big? Daughter, when we are at rock bottom, the only way is up, and sometimes life's most difficult experiences are the ones that give us the strength to accomplish things we never thought possible." The contract signing ceremony was held at the farm itself, attended by local authorities, representatives of the English company, and dozens of journalists. Dorothy's story had become known nationally as an example of how perseverance and courage can transform seemingly impossible situations into extraordinary victories. During her speech at the ceremony, Dorothy spoke about the importance of preserving family memory and never giving up the fight for one's rights. "If there's one lesson I'd like to leave with you," she told the audience, "it's that age should never be seen as a limitation, but as an opportunity to use all the wisdom accumulated over a lifetime to make a difference in the world." Rebecca also gave an emotional speech, publicly apologizing for what she had done to her mother and explaining how the experience had transformed her life priorities. "I learned that true success does not come from accumulating wealth or winning at any cost, but from using our talents to protect those who need protection and preserve what is important for future generations." After the ceremony, as the last guests were saying goodbye, Dorothy and Rebecca walked together to the place where it all began, the clearing where the tent had been pitched that first night. "Mum, do you want us to put a marker here to commemorate the place where our new life began?" Dorothy thought for a moment. "No, daughter, I don't want a physical marker. I want this place to remain just a clearing in the woods where people can come to reflect, to connect with nature, and to remember that sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves." They sat on the grass, in the same spot where Dorothy had spent those difficult nights 2 years earlier. Toffee and Honey approached and lay down beside them, as they always did. "Mom, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you really forgive me for what I did?" Dorothy looked into her daughter's eyes and smiled. "Daughter, I forgave you the moment I understood you had been manipulated. And more than that, I thank you." "Thank me. Because if you hadn't done what you did, we would never have discovered our true strength. We would never have found the documents. We would never have built all that we have today." "So you think everything happened for a reason?" "I think life presents us with challenges to show us what we are capable of, and we have both shown ourselves capable of far more than we ever imagined." The sun was setting between the trees, tinting everything gold, just like on the first night Dorothy had spent there. But now, instead of fear and helplessness, she felt peace and gratitude. "Daughter, let's make a pact." "What pact?" "Let's commit to never keeping secrets from each other again. If you have problems, tell me. If I have worries, I'll share them with you. Because trust is the only treasure that cannot be found buried in the earth." "I agree, Mother, and I promise I will always remember that you are much wiser and stronger than I ever imagined. And I promise I will always remember that you are a good person who just made a mistake because you were scared." They stayed there until the stars appeared in the sky, talking about future plans for the sanctuary, about the social projects they would develop, and about how they wanted their legacy to be remembered by future generations. When they finally stood up to go back home, Dorothy looked one last time at the clearing. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "Thank you for what, Mother?" "For everything. For the opportunity to discover my strength, for the chance to strengthen our relationship, for the possibility of making a difference in other people's lives." "Who are you thanking?" "Life, fate, my great-grandfather William, the dogs that guided us, All the factors that combined to bring us here. As they walked back home, followed by the faithful Toffee and Honey, Dorothy reflected on everything that had happened since that first terrible night in the woods. Abandonment had turned into discovery. Betrayal had turned into forgiveness. Fragility had turned into strength. And what seemed like the end of a family became the beginning of a legacy that would last for generations. 2 years later, when Hidden Treasure Farm completed 5 years of operation, Dorothy and Rebecca decided to write a book together about their experience. The book became a national bestseller, inspiring thousands of people to value their family roots and to never give up fighting for their rights regardless of age. Dorothy became a sought-after speaker, traveling across the country to talk about senior rights, preservation of family memory, and female empowerment. Rebecca expanded her law firm, specializing in helping families who were victims of real estate fraud and property appropriation schemes. The sanctuary grew and became an internationally recognized center for wildlife conservation and environmental education, receiving visitors from dozens of countries. But for Dorothy, the greatest success was not the awards, the public recognition, or even the accumulated wealth. The greatest success was waking up every morning, knowing that she and Rebecca had found a perfect balance in their lives. They worked together, but respected each other's individuality. They shared responsibilities but maintained their autonomy, and most importantly, they had learned to communicate with total honesty. In her last interview for a national magazine, when Dorothy was asked what advice she would give to other women her age, her answer was simple: never accept others defining your limitations. Never allow age to be used as an excuse to diminish your dreams. And most of all, never underestimate the strength that exists within you, because sometimes that strength only reveals itself when we are facing our greatest challenges. And when asked what her greatest pride was, she answered without hesitation: having discovered that it's never too late to start over, and that the most important relationships in our lives can be transformed and strengthened, no matter how many mistakes were made in the past. The story of Dorothy Mitchell became much more than an individual case of overcoming adversity. It became a symbol that the wisdom that comes with age, when combined with courage and determination, can achieve extraordinary transformations. And at the farm where it all began, Toffee and Honey continued their daily watch, protecting not only the property, but also the legacy of a family that proved true love and perseverance can overcome any obstacle. The tent where Dorothy Mitchell spent those first difficult nights was never used again. But the spot where it was pitched became a pilgrimage point for visitors from all over the world, who came seeking inspiration to face their own challenges. And there, in that simple clearing among the trees, a discreet plaque reminded all who passed by. Here, a new life began. Here, it was proven that it is never too late to start over. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this moving story of overcoming and discovery. Which lesson touched you the most? The importance of preserving family memory, the strength that emerges in the most difficult moments, or the transformative power of forgiveness? Share your reflections in the comments and tell us where you are watching from.